The galaxy had not seen peace in 300 years. Empress Vexithera sat on her throne and ruled over 1,000 worlds. Her empire was vast and terrible. Every species that met her forces had two choices: bow down or die. Most chose to bow down. The Empress was not like other rulers. She did not age. She did not grow weak. She had lived for 3 centuries and would live for 3 more, or so everyone believed. Her power came from technology that no one else understood. Her ships were faster, her weapons stronger, and her mind could break the will of anyone who opposed her. On the capital world of Zinthos Prime, the Empress sat in her throne room and watched her empire grow. Her red eyes glowed in the darkness as she received reports from across the galaxy. Another world had fallen. Another species had surrendered. Another victory for the eternal empire. But the Empress was about to meet something she had never encountered before. She was about to meet humanity. The Horizon's Edge was a colony ship from Earth. It carried 1,500 people who were looking for a new home among the stars. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched the stars pass by. He was 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He had spent 20 years in space and thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The alarms went off without warning. Red lights flashed across every screen. Jake jumped to his feet as his first officer, Lisa Grant, started checking the sensors. "Captain, we have incoming ships," Lisa said. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension beneath it. "They just appeared out of nowhere. I count 12 vessels, all heavily armed." Jake looked at the view screen. The alien ships were unlike anything in human records. They were dark and angular, covered in weapons that were already powering up. They surrounded the Horizon's Edge like wolves circling prey. "Hail them," Jake ordered. "Let them know we're peaceful." The response came quickly, translated into perfect English by technology that humanity had never seen before. "You have entered the territory of Empress Vexthara, eternal ruler of the Zinthari Empire. Your ship and everyone on it now belongs to the Empress. Power down your engines and surrender immediately." Jake felt his blood run cold. He looked at Lisa, who was already running calculations on her console. They had no weapons on this ship. It was designed for exploration and colonization, not war. Against 12 warships, they had no chance in a fight. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth," he transmitted back. "We didn't know this space was claimed. We're just passing through. Let us leave and you'll never see us again. Surrender or die." Jake had made plenty of hard decisions in his career, but this was different. He had 1,500 people on his ship, families with children, old people looking for a peaceful place to retire, young couples dreaming of a new life. He could not let them become slaves to some alien empire. "Lisa, can we jump?" he asked quietly. Lisa's fingers flew over her controls. "The new drive is untested at this range. It might work or it might tear the ship apart." "Better than slavery," Jake said. He pressed the ship-wide communication button. "All hands, brace for emergency jump. This is going to be rough." The Horizon's Edge had an experimental faster-than-light drive that human scientists had just developed. It could tear a hole in space and let a ship travel vast distances in seconds. But it was dangerous and unpredictable. Using it this close to other ships was insane. Jake gave the order anyway. The ship shuddered as the drive engaged. Reality twisted and bent around them. Jake felt his stomach drop as space itself seemed to scream. The view screen showed colors that should not exist. Then, with a final lurch, they were somewhere else. The Zinthari ships were gone. They had escaped. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. He had done something no other species had ever done. He had refused the Empress's command and lived to tell about it. The Zinthari would not forget this insult. They would come looking for the humans who had dared to say no. "Get us home," Jake told Lisa. "Earth needs to know what's coming." The journey back to human space took 3 months. Jake spent every day thinking about what he had seen. The Zinthari Empire was powerful beyond anything humanity had faced before. Their technology was centuries ahead, their forces numbered in the millions, and their Empress had ruled for 300 years without a single defeat. How could humanity possibly stand against that? When the horizon's edge finally reached Earth, Jake was summoned to appear before the United Colonies Defense Council. He stood in a circular chamber filled with representatives from every human colony. They listened as he explained what had happened. The Zinthari Empire controls over 1,000 worlds, Jake said. Every species that has encountered them has either surrendered or been destroyed. Their Empress is apparently immortal. She has powers we don't understand, and I made her angry. Chairman Ryan Pierce was an old diplomat with silver hair and sharp eyes. He had negotiated treaties with a dozen alien species, but his face was grave as he listened to Jake's report. Captain Morrison, you did the right thing by refusing to surrender, Ryan said. But you're correct that you've made an enemy. The question is, what do we do now? We prepare for war, Jake said simply, because the war was going badly for humanity. Every day brought news of another defeat, another colony lost, another fleet destroyed. The Zinthari seemed unstoppable. Their ships appeared out of nowhere, attacked with overwhelming force, and vanished before human reinforcements could arrive. Within 3 months, humanity had lost 12 colonies and nearly half of its military forces. Jake Morrison watched the reports from Earth and felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. This war had started because he had refused to surrender, because he had escaped. Now thousands of people were dying because of his choice. Some nights, he could not sleep. He kept seeing the faces of colonists being marched away in chains, kept hearing the screams of the dying. But Jake also knew that surrendering would have been worse. The Zinthari did not treat their slaves well. Reports from escaped prisoners painted a horrible picture of life under the Empress. Entire populations worked to death in mines and factories. Children taken from their parents and raised to serve. Rebellious spirits broken through torture and mind control. Death would be kinder than what the Empress had planned for humanity. So Jake made a decision. If he had started this war, he would find a way to end it. He went back to the Defense Council with a plan. It was dangerous and probably suicidal, but it was better than waiting for the Zinthari to slowly destroy every human world. We need intelligence, Jake told the council. We're fighting blind. We don't know how their technology works, we don't understand their command structure, and we have no idea how to hurt them. I want to take a small team behind enemy lines and find out everything we can about the Zinthari Empire. Chairman Ryan Pierce looked at Jake like he had lost his mind. Captain, that's suicide. You want to fly into the heart of an empire that controls 1,000 worlds? An empire that's actively hunting us? Yes, sir, Jake said calmly. Because if we don't, we're going to lose. Our fleets can't beat them in open battle. Our technology can't match theirs. Our only chance is to find a weakness and exploit it. And we can't do that from here. The debate lasted for hours. Many council members thought Jake's plan was crazy, but in the end, they had no better options. Humanity was losing the war. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Jake was given permission to assemble a team. He chose carefully, picking people he trusted and who had skills that might keep them alive in enemy territory. First was Lisa Grant, his first officer from the Horizon's Edge. She was brilliant at tactics and strategy, able to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Jake trusted her with his life. Second was Kyle Sanders, a young engineer who was barely 25 but had an intuitive understanding of technology. Kyle could look at alien machines and figure out how they worked just by watching them. His skills would be essential for understanding Zinthari systems. Third was Emma Rodriguez, a xenobiologist who specialized in studying alien species. Emma had worked with dozens of different alien races and understood how their minds worked. She would help the team understand Zinthari culture and psychology. Fourth was Derek Chen, a former Special Forces operative who had served in the Colonial Marines before retiring. Derek was quiet and deadly, trained in combat and infiltration. If the team ran into trouble, Derek would keep them alive. Fifth was Hannah Wright, a communications specialist who could break any code and crack any encryption. Hannah was small and looked harmless, but her mind was sharp as a razor. She would be their eyes and ears, monitoring Zinthari transmissions and keeping them one step ahead of enemy patrols. It was a small team for an impossible mission, but Jake believed in them. The first challenge was getting a ship. Human vessels were too easy to detect in Zinthari space. They needed something that could pass as a local ship, something that would not trigger alarms. The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks into the war, human forces had managed to capture a Xinthari scout ship. It was small and fast, designed for reconnaissance rather than combat. More importantly, it had all the right identification codes and transponders. If Jake's team could fly it, they could move freely through enemy territory. Kyle spent 2 weeks studying the captured ship, learning how every system worked. The controls were designed for Xinthari hands, which had 6 fingers instead of 5, but Kyle managed to adapt them for human use. Hannah cracked the communication systems and learned how to mimic Xinthari transmissions. Emma studied recordings of Xinthari speech patterns and body language. When they were ready, Jake gathered his team in the hangar bay, where the stolen scout ship waited. "This is a one-way mission," he told them honestly. "We're flying into the heart of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The odds of us coming back are almost zero. If anyone wants to leave, now is the time. I won't think less of you." Nobody moved. Lisa spoke for all of them. "We're with you, Captain. All the way." They launched at midnight, slipping out of Earth's orbit under cover of darkness. The Xinthari scout ship handled differently than human vessels, but Kyle had trained them well. They jumped to faster-than-light speed and headed straight into enemy territory. The journey took 5 days. They passed through systems filled with Xinthari patrol ships, but their stolen vessels' identification codes worked perfectly. Nobody challenged them. Nobody suspected that the scout ship contained humans rather than Xinthari crew. Their first stop was a conquered world called Novan 3. It had been a thriving colony of a species called the Brevithi before the Xinthari arrived. Now it was a slave labor camp where millions toiled in factories, building weapons and ships for the Empress's endless wars. Jake landed the scout ship at a small spaceport on the edge of the main city. They disguised themselves as best they could, wearing stolen Xinthari uniforms and keeping to the shadows. The plan was simple: gather information, talk to the slaves, and learn everything possible about the Empire. What they discovered was worse than they had imagined. The Empress's power did not come from military might alone. It came from a technology called the Nexus, a massive structure on the Xinthari capital world that connected every enslaved population through quantum technology. The Nexus drained life energy from billions of beings and fed it to the Empress, keeping her immortal and giving her psychic powers that could crush any resistance. Every conquered world had a relay station that connected it to the Nexus. Every slave wore a collar that linked their mind to the system. The Empress could see through their eyes, hear through their ears, and control their actions with a thought. Rebellion was impossible because the Empress knew about it before it even began. The slaves of Novan 3 were broken and hopeless. They had lived under Xinthari rule for 50 years and could not remember what freedom felt like. But when they learned that humans were still fighting, still resisting, something flickered in their eyes. Hope, fragile and small, but real. An old Brevathi slave named Kelth spoke to Jake in secret, away from the monitoring. For 6 months, Jake Morrison and his team moved through the Xinthari Empire like ghosts. They visited slave worlds, abandoned outposts, and forgotten colonies. They talked to rebels hiding in the shadows and prisoners who had given up hope. Slowly, piece by piece, they built a picture of how the Empress's power really worked. The Nexus was the key to everything. It stood at the center of the Imperial Palace on Xinthos Prime, a massive crystalline structure that hummed with the psychic energy of 1 billion enslaved minds. Quantum relays on each conquered world connected to the Nexus, creating a vast network that spanned the entire empire. The Empress sat at the center of this web, feeding on the life force of her subjects and using their combined mental power to fuel her immortality and psychic abilities. But the more Jake learned about the Nexus, the more impossible their mission seemed. The structure was protected by reality shields that made it exist slightly out of phase with normal space. Weapons could not touch it. Bombs passed right through it without causing damage. The Empress had designed it to be invincible, and for 300 years no one had proven her wrong. On a mining world called Kreth 7, they found someone who knew more than most. His name was Zelkor, a former Zinthari scientist who had been imprisoned for questioning the Empress's policies. The insectoid alien was missing 3 of his 6 limbs, punishment for his rebellion, but his mind was still sharp. They met him in an abandoned maintenance tunnel deep beneath the prison complex. Derek stood guard while Jake and Emma spoke to the old scientist. Zelkor's translator device converted his clicking language into words they could understand. "You are the humans everyone speaks of," Zelkor said. His compound eyes studied Jake with interest. "The ones who escaped the Empress's ships? The ones who started a war rather than surrender? Your species is either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Jake admitted. "We need to know how to destroy the Nexus. Can you help us?" Zelkor made a sound like rattling stones, which the translator interpreted as laughter. "I spent 40 years studying the Nexus. I know its design better than anyone except the Empress herself, and I tell you, it cannot be destroyed." "There must be a way," Lisa insisted. "The Nexus is not simply a machine," Zelkor explained. "It is a living system, constantly adapting and evolving. It draws power from the quantum relays that connect each enslaved world. These relays are defended by the Empress's most powerful telepaths and protected by entire fleets. You would need to simultaneously destroy all 1,000 connection points to shut down the Nexus. No force in the galaxy could coordinate such an attack." Kyle had been studying the technical diagrams that Zelkor provided. His young face was creased with concentration as he traced the energy flows with his finger. "What if we didn't destroy the connections? What if we overloaded them instead?" Zelkor's antennae twitched with surprise. "Explain." "The Nexus is designed to drain energy from the enslaved worlds," Kyle said. "It pulls life force in and channels it to the Empress. But what if we reversed the flow? What if we pumped energy into the system faster than it could process?" "The feedback loop would be catastrophic," Zelkor admitted. "The Nexus would tear itself apart from the inside." "But how would you generate enough energy to overload a system that feeds on 1 billion minds?" Emma had been quiet during this conversation, but now she spoke up. "What about humans? We're not connected to the network. We have no natural psychic ability. What would happen if a human mind was forcibly linked to the Nexus?" Zelkor considered this. "Humans are psychically null. Your minds would not register properly in the quantum field. The Nexus would try to process your consciousness but fail. It would be like introducing corrupted data into a computer system." "So we'd be like a virus," Hannah said, understanding dawning on her face. "Precisely," Zelkor clicked excitedly. "One human consciousness might not cause significant damage, but multiple human minds, introduced directly into the Nexus core, could potentially destabilize the entire network." "How many humans would we need?" Jake asked. "I cannot calculate exactly," Zelkor admitted, "but the Nexus core has connection ports for maintenance and diagnostics. If 5 or 6 humans connected simultaneously and flooded the system with their consciousness, the resulting chaos might be enough to cause a cascade failure." Jake looked at his team. 5 humans plus himself made 6. It was almost like the universe had planned this. "There's a problem," Derek said from his guard position. "The Nexus is located in the Imperial Palace on Zinthos Prime. That's the most heavily defended location in the entire Empire. How do we even get there?" "That," Zelkor said, "is a question I cannot answer. Security around the capital is absolute. The Empress herself resides there, along with her most elite forces. Approaching the planet is suicide. Reaching the palace is impossible, and accessing the Nexus chamber is beyond any hope." "We'll find a way," Jake said, with more confidence than he felt. They spent another month gathering information about Zinthos Prime. They studied patrol routes, defense networks, and sensor blind spots. They talked to escaped prisoners who had been held in the Imperial dungeons. They bribed corrupt Zinthari officials for maps and access codes. Slowly, impossibly, a plan began to form. The key was distraction. They needed something big enough to draw the Empress's attention away from her homeworld. Something that would make her commit her forces to a battle far from the capital. Jake knew exactly what that would take. He sent an encrypted message back to Earth, routed through a dozen relay stations to avoid detection. The message was simple. Humanity needed to launch a massive assault on the Empire's outer defenses. It would be a suicide mission, a desperate attack that would almost certainly fail. But it would give Jake's team the opening they needed. Chairman Ryan Pierce's reply came 3 weeks later. "We'll do it. The fleet will launch in 2 months. That's how long you have to reach Zinthos Prime and get into position. After that, you're on your own. Good luck, Captain. Humanity is counting on you." Jake gathered his team in their cramped quarters aboard the stolen scout ship. They looked tired and worn. 6 months behind enemy lines had taken its toll. Derek had a scar from a knife fight in a spaceport bar. Hannah's hands shook slightly from stress. Emma had dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. Kyle looked like he had aged 5 years. And Lisa's usual calm expression was cracked with worry. But when Jake explained the plan, when he told them what they would have to do, none of them hesitated. "We knew this was a one-way mission from the start," Lisa said. "If we can take down the Empress and free all those enslaved worlds, our lives are a small price to pay." "We're going to die," Derek stated flatly. "Let's be honest about that. Once we connect to the Nexus, the feedback will kill us." "I know," Jake said quietly. "I'm asking you all to sacrifice everything. Your lives, your futures, any chance of seeing home again. It's not fair, and it's not right. But it's the only way." Kyle managed a weak smile. "My mother always said I'd do something important with my life. I don't think she imagined this, but I'll take it." The journey to Zinthos Prime took 3 weeks. Jake and his team spent every moment preparing for what they knew would be their final mission. Kyle worked on modifying their equipment to interface with Zinthari technology. Emma studied everything they had learned about the Nexus, memorizing layouts and connection points. Derek cleaned his weapons and planned their route through the Imperial Palace. Hannah practiced mimicking Zinthari communication protocols. Lisa coordinated with the human fleet, ensuring the timing of their distraction would be perfect. Jake spent his time writing messages to people back home, letters that would never be sent but needed to be written anyway. He wrote to his sister, telling her he was proud of the doctor she had become. He wrote to his old academy instructor, thanking him for the lessons that had kept him alive this long. He wrote to the families of the 1,500 colonists he had saved from the horizon's edge, telling them their sacrifice had bought humanity time to prepare. When they finally arrived at Zinthos Prime, the sight took their breath away. The capital world was massive, 3 times the size of Earth, with cities that stretched across entire continents. Orbital stations surrounded the planet like a crown of steel and crystal. Warships patrolled in perfect formations, their weapons always charged and ready. This was the heart of an empire that had conquered 1,000 worlds, and it showed. "Getting past those defenses will be impossible," Derek said, studying the scanner readouts. "Not impossible," Hannah corrected. "Just really, really difficult. I've been monitoring their communication patterns. There's a shift change in the orbital defense grid every 6 hours. For about 90 seconds during the transition, there's a gap in sensor coverage on the night side of the planet." 90 seconds is not a lot of time, Lisa pointed out. "It's what we have," Jake said. "We'll make it work." They waited in a debris field at the edge of the system, watching and timing the patrol patterns. Hannah was right about the gap. Every 6 hours, like clockwork, the sensors went dark for exactly 92 seconds. It was barely enough time, but it would have to do. 2 days later, the human fleet launched its attack on the Empire's outer defenses. The assault was massive and coordinated, hitting 12 different systems simultaneously. It was exactly the kind of threat that would demand the Empress's personal attention. Jake watched the long-range sensors as Zinthari forces began moving away from the capital, rushing to defend the outer territories. "This is it," Jake said. "Everyone ready?" They all nodded. There were no more words to say. They had gone over the plan 100 times. Either it would work or it would not. Kyle pushed the scout ship's engines to maximum, timing their approach perfectly. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the exact moment the sensor gap appeared. The ship dove toward the planet's night side, moving faster than anything human-made had a right to move. Alarms screamed as the hull heated from atmospheric friction, but Kyle kept them on course. 30 seconds to sensor restoration, Hannah counted down. 20 seconds, 10 seconds. They cleared the upper atmosphere just as the sensors came back online. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have seen a brief flicker on their screens. But the Zinthari were distracted by the human fleet's attack, and one small anomaly went unnoticed. Jake let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Good work, everyone. Now comes the hard part. They landed in an industrial district on the outskirts of the capital city. The area was filled with warehouses and factories, places where a small ship could hide without attracting attention. Derek scouted the area while the others gathered their equipment. The Imperial Palace was visible even from this distance, a massive structure of black stone and dark crystal that rose from the center of the city like a monument to tyranny. It was 3 kilometers tall and sprawled across an area the size of a small city. Somewhere deep inside, protected by armies and technology, was the Nexus. We need transportation, Lisa said, studying the city map. The palace is 40 kilometers from here. We can't walk that distance without being spotted. Kyle had been examining a nearby parking area where Zinthari vehicles were stored. I can hotwire one of those cargo transports. It won't be comfortable, but it will get us there. They waited until dark. Then Kyle worked his magic on a large transport vehicle. Within minutes, the engine hummed to life. They climbed into the back, hiding among crates of supplies destined for the palace. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it would keep them out of sight. The automated transport joined a convoy heading toward the palace. Jake watched through a crack in the cargo bay as they passed through security checkpoints. Each time his heart pounded, certain they would be discovered. But the Zinthari guards were focused on scanning for weapons and explosives, not stowaways. The transport passed through without incident. They reached a loading dock on the palace's lower levels. As soon as the transport stopped, Derek cracked the door open and checked for guards. The dock was busy with workers moving supplies, but no one was paying attention to their vehicle. Now, Jake whispered. They slipped out of the transport and into the shadows. Emma led the way, following the route they had memorized from stolen palace maps. The corridors were vast and decorated with trophies from conquered worlds. Weapons hung on the walls, armor from 100 different species, banners and flags from civilizations that no longer existed. It was a museum of the Empress's cruelty. They moved quickly and quietly, avoiding patrols and security cameras. Derek's Special Forces training kept them alive as they navigated the maze-like structure. Twice they had to hide while groups of Zinthari soldiers passed by. Once they barely avoided a psychic scan by one of the Empress's telepaths. The deeper they went, the more ornate the palace became. They passed through chambers filled with treasures stolen from 1,000 worlds. They saw throne rooms where the Empress received tribute from her subjects. They walked past dungeons where prisoners screamed in the darkness. Finally, after 2 hours of careful movement, they reached a massive door made of dark metal inscribed with alien symbols. According to the maps, this door led to the Nexus chamber. Hannah checked the lock mechanism, her fingers flying over the control panel. "This is military-grade encryption," she said. "It's going to take me at least 20 minutes to crack it." "We don't have 20 minutes, Derek said, hearing footsteps approaching in the distance. "Work faster." Hannah's hands shook as she worked, sweat dripping down her face. The footsteps grew louder. Derek positioned himself between Hannah and the approaching sounds, his weapon ready. Lisa and Kyle stood on either side, prepared for a fight they probably could not win. 15 minutes, Hannah whispered. Come on, come on." The footsteps stopped. Jake could see shadows moving in the corridor beyond. They had been discovered. "Hannah," Jake said quietly, "time to go." "Almost there, just a few more seconds." A Zinthari patrol rounded the corner and froze, seeing the humans. For a moment, both sides stared at each other in surprise. Then the aliens reached for their weapons. Derek fired first. His bullets dropped 2 Zinthari before they could raise their energy rifles. Kyle threw a grenade that sent the others diving for cover. Lisa shot another one as it tried to flank them. "Got it," Hannah shouted as the massive door hissed open. They dove through the doorway just as more Zinthari reinforcements arrived. Derek threw another grenade behind them, buying precious seconds. The door slammed shut, and Hannah locked it from the inside. They were in the Nexus chamber, but they were also trapped. The room was enormous, a perfect sphere at least 50 meters across. At its center floated the Nexus itself, a crystalline structure that pulsed with light from within. Jake could feel it even without touching it. The psychic energy of a billion enslaved minds, all channeled into this one place. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. Around the perimeter of the chamber were 6 connection ports, exactly as Zelkor had described. They were crystalline interfaces designed for maintenance and diagnostics. The pain was beyond anything Jake had ever imagined. His consciousness was ripped from his body and thrown into a vast network of thoughts, memories, and suffering. He could feel a billion minds pressing against his own, each one trapped in an endless cycle of servitude and despair. The weight of their agony threatened to crush his sanity. But Jake had not come this far to break now. He pushed back against the overwhelming force, maintaining his sense of self even as the Nexus tried to process his alien consciousness. Around him, he could feel his team doing the same. Lisa's tactical mind created order from chaos. Kyle's intuitive understanding of systems found weaknesses in the network. Emma's empathy connected with the enslaved minds, offering comfort and hope. Derek's warrior spirit refused to surrender. Hannah's sharp intelligence cut through the confusion like a blade. Together, they were a virus in the system. The Nexus had evolved over 3 centuries to drain and control psychic species, but it had no framework for understanding human consciousness. Humans had no natural psychic ability, no innate connection to the quantum field. They were blank spaces in the network, errors that the system could not resolve. And when the Nexus tried to process them anyway, everything began to break down. Jake felt the Empress's presence before he heard her voice. It was like standing before a dark sun, a concentration of power that should not exist in nature. Vexathara materialized in the Nexus chamber, her physical form towering and terrible. Her red eyes blazed with fury as she looked at the 6 humans connected to her most precious technology. "What have you done?" Her voice echoed through both the chamber and the quantum network, filled with rage and something Jake had not expected to hear. Fear. "We're breaking your chains," Jake said, his words traveling through the Nexus to every enslaved mind in the Empire. "Your reign ends today." Vexathara raised her hand, and Jake felt his mind being torn apart. The Empress's psychic power was immense, refined over 300 years and amplified by the Nexus itself. She could crush thoughts, shatter consciousness, and reduce minds to empty shells. She had done it countless times before, but Jake was not alone. His team stood with him in the quantum space, their human minds linked in a way the Empress could not understand. They shared strength and determination, supporting each other against the psychic assault. When the Empress attacked Jake, Lisa deflected part of the blow. When she turned on Lisa, Derek absorbed the impact. They moved as one, a single unit fighting against impossible odds. "You are nothing," Vexathara screamed. "I have ruled for 3 centuries. I have conquered 1,000 worlds. You cannot defeat me." "Watch us," Emma said. Kyle had found what he was looking for in the Nexus network. The quantum relays that connected each enslaved world operated on specific frequencies, carefully tuned to drain just enough life energy without killing the host. But the system was designed to be stable and predictable. It could not handle chaos. And 6 human minds were pure chaos. Kyle started pushing energy into the network instead of letting it drain him. His consciousness flooded the system with random thoughts, memories, and sensations that the Nexus could not categorize. Hannah joined him, her communication expertise letting her broadcast the chaos across all channels simultaneously. Emma reached out to the enslaved minds, showing them what freedom felt like and encouraging them to resist. The quantum relays began to fluctuate. On worlds across the Empire, the collars that bound slaves to the network started to malfunction. Connections that had been stable for decades suddenly became unstable. The carefully maintained flow of energy turned turbulent. Vexathara felt her power slipping away. For 300 years, she had fed on the life force of billions. The constant stream of energy had kept her young, strong, and immortal. Now that stream was being disrupted by 6 impossible humans who refused to die. No, she whispered, and for the first time in centuries, the Empress felt afraid. This cannot be happening. It's already happening, Lisa said. She had mapped the entire network structure and found the critical nodes that kept everything connected. With surgical precision, she began severing the connections, isolating entire sections of the Empire from the Nexus. Derek's combat instincts translated into the quantum space as pure aggression. He attacked the Nexus's defensive protocols, overwhelming the security systems with brute force. Firewalls collapsed. Safeguards failed. The network that had seemed invincible began to crumble. Jake could feel his physical body dying. The feedback from the Nexus was cooking his nervous system, burning out neurons faster than they could regenerate. He could see his team suffering the same fate. Kyle's young face was contorted with pain. Emma was screaming, though no sound came from her lips. Derek's warrior spirit was fading. Hannah's brilliant mind was fragmenting. Lisa's calm was breaking, but they did not stop. They could not stop. Too much depended on them. Across the Empire, the enslaved populations began to wake up. On Novan 3, the Bravati slaves felt their collars go dead and realized they were free. On Kreth 7, prisoners rose up against their guards. On world after world, the chains that had bound 1,000 civilizations for 3 centuries suddenly shattered. And on Zinthos Prime, in the heart of the Imperial Palace, the Nexus began to tear itself apart. The crystalline structure cracked, fractures spreading like lightning across its surface. The chamber filled with light as quantum energy, no longer constrained by the network's protocols, exploded outward. Vexathera screamed as the feedback loop reversed, draining her instead of feeding her. For 300 years, she had sustained herself by stealing the life force of others. Now, in a single terrible moment, 3 centuries of stolen life came rushing back. Her body began to age, rapidly cycling through the years she had cheated. Her skin wrinkled and sagged. Her hair turned white and fell out in clumps. Her bones became brittle and weak. "No!" she cried out, her voice cracking with age. "I am eternal. I am supreme. I cannot die." But she was dying. The Empress who had ruled 1,000 worlds, who had believed herself immortal, was becoming mortal again. And mortality brought with it a debt that had been accumulating for 3 centuries. Jake watched through failing eyes as Vexathera collapsed, her body crumbling to dust even as her consciousness fragmented across the quantum network. The most powerful being in the galaxy was reduced to nothing in seconds, destroyed by the very system she had created to ensure her immortality. The Nexus exploded. The blast vaporized the Imperial Palace and sent shockwaves rippling across Zinthos Prime. In orbit, the Zinthari fleets lost power as the network that coordinated them collapsed. The Empress's throne ship, the Eternal Dominion, broke apart as its reality-bending drives failed without the Nexus to sustain them. And across 1,000 worlds, billions of beings suddenly found themselves free for the first time in their lives. Jake felt his consciousness slipping away. His physical body was destroyed, his nervous system burned out beyond any hope of recovery. But in his final moments, he felt something he had not expected. Peace. He had done it. They had all done it. Humanity's desperate gamble had paid off. The Empire was falling, the slaves were free, and the galaxy would never again bow to a tyrant who claimed to be immortal. The news reached Earth 3 days after the Nexus explosion. Chairman Ryan Pierce stood in the Defense Council chamber and read the reports with tears streaming down his face. The Zinthari Empire was falling. Not slowly, not gradually, but collapsing completely in a matter of days. The quantum network that had held it together was gone, and without it, the Empire had nothing to sustain its power. On world after world, the freed slaves rose up against their former masters. The Zinthari military, which had seemed invincible just days before, was in chaos. Without the Nexus to coordinate their movements, and without the Empress's psychic control to enforce discipline, the fleets scattered and retreated. Some surrendered to the rebels. Others fled into deep space, trying to escape the vengeance of those they had oppressed. The human fleet, battered but victorious, began receiving requests for help from liberated worlds. Species that had never heard of humanity before were asking for assistance, for guidance, for hope. Earth sent diplomats, aid workers, and peacekeepers to help manage the chaos and prevent the Empire's collapse from turning into a galaxy-wide disaster. But even as humanity celebrated its impossible victory, Ryan Pierce felt the weight of what it had cost. 6 people had given their lives to achieve this miracle. 6 humans who had walked into certain death because their captain had asked them to. Ryan ordered search and rescue teams to Zinthos Prime the moment it was safe to approach the planet. The Imperial Palace was gone, replaced by a crater that stretched for kilometers. The explosion had been so powerful that it had changed the planet's geography. Where the Nexus had stood, there was now only fused glass and melted stone. The rescue teams dug through the rubble for a week, searching for any sign of survivors. They found 5 bodies in the ruins of the Nexus chamber. Emma Rodriguez, Kyle Sanders, Derek Chen, Hannah Wright, and Lisa Grant had all died instantly when the Nexus exploded, their bodies protected just enough by the crystalline structure to remain identifiable. They were recovered with full honors and brought back to Earth for burial. But Jake Morrison was never found. Some people believed he died in the explosion and was simply vaporized beyond recovery. Others claimed his consciousness was scattered across the quantum network, his mind living on in the very system he had helped destroy. There were even reports from former slaves who swore they could sometimes feel his presence, a comforting touch in moments of darkness that reminded them they were free. The truth remained a mystery, but his legacy did not. Within 6 months of the Nexus's destruction, the Zinthari Empire had completely dissolved. The 1,000 conquered worlds formed a coalition based on cooperation and mutual aid rather than domination and slavery. They called it the Free Worlds Alliance, and they invited humanity to join as a founding member. The first meeting of the Alliance took place on Novan 3, the world where Jake's team had first learned about the Nexus. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to discuss their future. It was chaotic and difficult, with old grudges and deep wounds that would take generations to heal. But it was also hopeful. For the first time in 3 centuries, the galaxy was not ruled by fear. The Alliance named Jake Morrison as their first honorary citizen, even though he was not there to receive the title. They commissioned monuments on every freed world, simple structures that told the story of the human captain and his team who had given everything to break the chains of slavery. Children learned their names in school. Songs were written about their sacrifice, and historians across the galaxy began documenting what would be remembered as the greatest act of heroism the universe had ever seen. On Earth, the victory changed everything. Humanity had proven itself on the galactic stage, not through conquest but through sacrifice. Other species that had been watching from the shadows suddenly wanted to make contact. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. Human technology advanced rapidly as friendly aliens shared their knowledge. Within a decade, humanity had gone from a minor species on the edge of known space to a major player in galactic politics. But the people who had known Jake Morrison personally did not care about politics or trade agreements. They cared about the man they had lost. Jake's sister, Catherine Morrison, became a spokesperson for the families of those who had died in the war. She traveled to the freed worlds and met with former slaves, listening to their stories and sharing memories of her brother. She learned that Jake had become a symbol of hope across the galaxy, a reminder that even ordinary people could change the universe if they had the courage to stand up for what was right. The crew of the Horizon's Edge held a memorial service for their captain. 1,500 colonists, the people Jake had saved from the Zinthari, gathered to honor his memory. They planted a tree for each member of his team, 6 saplings that would grow into a memorial grove. And they promised to teach their children about the sacrifice that had bought them their freedom. Ryan Pierce retired from the Defense Council 2 years after the war ended. In his final speech, he spoke about Jake Morrison and what humanity had learned from his example. "We won this war not because we had better weapons or superior technology. We won because 6 people refused to accept that evil could not be defeated. They looked at an immortal Empress ruling 1,000 worlds and said no. They saw an empire built on suffering and decided to tear it down, even knowing it would cost them everything. That is the spirit that defines humanity. Not our cleverness or our ambition, but our stubborn refusal to let injustice stand. The words resonated across human space and beyond. The story of Jake Morrison became required reading in schools, not just on Earth but on hundreds of worlds. Military academies studied his tactics. Philosophers debated the ethics of his sacrifice. Children played games where they pretended to be the brave humans who had destroyed the Nexus. But perhaps the greatest tribute came from an unexpected source. Selkor, the old Zinthari scientist who had helped Jake's team, spent his remaining years writing a comprehensive history of the Empire's fall. His final volume, published shortly before his death, was dedicated to Jake Morrison and his crew. The dedication was simple but powerful. To the humans who showed us that immortality is not measured in years but in the impact we have on others. Vexthera lived for 3 centuries and left behind only suffering. Jake Morrison lived for 42 years and freed a galaxy. History will remember which life mattered more. 10 years after the Nexus's destruction, the Free Worlds Alliance built a space station in orbit around Zinthos Prime. It was constructed from materials donated by every member world, a symbol of unity and cooperation. They named it Morrison Station, and it became the diplomatic heart of the new galactic order. At the station's dedication ceremony, representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered to unveil a monument in the central plaza. It showed 6 figures standing in a circle, their hands reaching toward a crystalline structure in the center. The figures were stylized rather than realistic, but everyone knew who they represented. Jake Morrison, Lisa Grant, Kyle Sanders, Emma Rodriguez, Derek Chen, and Hannah Wright. The humans who had given everything. The inscription beneath the monument was written in 100 different languages, but the message was the same in all of them. They faced an empire with nothing but courage. They broke chains that had held for centuries. They proved that freedom is worth any sacrifice. Their names will echo across the stars forever. On Earth, in a small town where Jake Morrison had grown up, his childhood home was preserved as a museum. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see where the legend had begun. They walked through the rooms where a young boy had dreamed of exploring the stars, never imagining that he would one day save a galaxy. The museum's curator was an old woman who had been Jake's teacher when he was 10 years old. She remembered him as a quiet but determined student who never gave up on a problem until he had solved it. Jake was always the kid who would help others, she told visitors. If someone was being bullied, Jake stood up for them. If someone was struggling with homework, Jake stayed after school to help. He was not the smartest or the strongest, but he had something more important. He had a good heart. That good heart had changed the universe. 20 years after the war, a new generation came of age having never known the Zinthari Empire. They grew up in a galaxy where slavery was illegal, where cooperation was valued over conquest, and where the name Jake Morrison was synonymous with heroism. Some historians worried that the real man was being lost beneath the legend, that Jake was becoming more myth than memory. But the people who had known him, who had served with him and trusted him, worked hard to keep his humanity alive. They shared stories of his mistakes and doubts, his fears and failures. They wanted future generations to understand that Jake Morrison was not a perfect hero from a story. He was a regular person who made the choice to do something extraordinary when the moment demanded it. And that, more than any monument or ceremony, was his true legacy. Jake Morrison proved that heroism was not about being superhuman. It was about being human enough to care about others more than yourself. It was about looking at an impossible situation and trying anyway. It was about refusing to let evil win, even when the cost was everything you had. The galaxy would never forget the alien Empress who had ruled for 3 centuries. But it would remember forever the human captain who brought her empire down in a single day. Vexthera had wanted to live forever. Jake Morrison had wanted to make a difference. Only one of them succeeded. In the end, the story of humanity's first great war was not about superior technology or military might. It was about 6 people who looked at 1 billion enslaved minds and said, "We can free them." It was about a captain who led his team into certain death because it was the right thing to do. It was about the stubborn human spirit that refused to accept that some battles could not be won. The Zinthari Empire fell not because it was weak, but because it had never encountered anything like humanity before. It had never faced a species that valued freedom more than survival, that would sacrifice everything for a cause they believed in. The Empress had conquered 1,000 worlds, but she could not conquer the human heart. And so the galaxy changed. The age of empires gave way to an age of cooperation. The chains were broken, and 6 names were written in the stars, remembered and honored by billions who lived in freedom because of their sacrifice. Jake Morrison, Lisa Grant, Kyle Sanders, Emma Rodriguez, Derek Chen, and Hannah Wright. Heroes not because they were perfect, but because when the moment came, they chose to be brave. As darkness closed in, Jake thought of home. He thought of Earth and the stars and the 1,500 colonists whose lives he had saved. He thought of the billions he would never meet who were waking up to freedom because of what his team had sacrificed. It was enough. His consciousness faded, scattering across the quantum network like dust in the wind. Around him, his team did the same. Lisa, Kyle, Emma, Derek, and Hannah all let go, their human minds dissolving into the vast digital space they had poisoned and destroyed. The Nexus chamber collapsed inward, crushing everything within it. The explosion spread through the palace, then through the city, and finally across the planet. Zinthos Prime burned as the heart of the Empire was torn apart. And in space above, the human fleet received confused transmissions from across the Empire. The Zinthari forces were retreating. The slaves were rebelling. The Empire was collapsing. Humanity had won. Outside the chamber, they could hear more soldiers arriving. Weapons fire started striking the door. It would not hold for long. "Everyone to a port," Jake ordered. "We do this now." They each moved to one of the connection points. Jake looked at his team one last time. These people had followed him across the galaxy, had trusted him with their lives, and now they were about to die because he had asked them to. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Lisa smiled at him. "See you on the other side, Captain." Jake placed his hand on the crystalline interface. The moment he touched it, his world exploded. Emma nodded. Every xenobiologist dreams of making first contact with a new species. I got to do that. And now I get to save billions of lives. How many people can say that? Hannah wiped tears from her eyes, but her voice was steady. My sister is back on Earth with her 2 kids. If we don't stop the Empress, the Zinthari will reach Earth eventually. I'm doing this for them. Then it's settled, Jake said. We go to Zinthos Prime. We infiltrate the Imperial Palace. We connect to the Nexus, and we bring down an empire. They set course for the capital world, knowing they would never leave it alive. Systems. You must destroy the Nexus, Kelth whispered. It is the source of the Empress's power. Without it, she is mortal. Without it, her empire will fall. How do we destroy it? Jake asked. I do not know, Kelth admitted. The Nexus is protected by technology beyond understanding. Many have tried to attack it. All have failed, but you must find a way. You are our only hope. Jake and his team left Novan 3 with more questions than answers. They had learned about the Nexus, but not how to destroy it. They needed more information, more intelligence, so they traveled deeper into the Empire, visiting world after world, talking to slaves and rebels, piecing together the puzzle one fragment at a time. And with every world they visited, Jake's determination grew stronger. He would find a way to stop the Empress, or he would die trying. I are coming. I embarrassed them. I escaped when no one else ever has. The Empress won't let that stand. Some council members wanted to try diplomacy. Others wanted to hide and hope the Zinthari would forget about them. But Jake knew better. He had seen the cold calculation in those alien ships. The Zinthari did not forget. They did not forgive. 6 weeks later, Jake's prediction came true. The Zinthari Empire arrived at humanity's outer colonies with overwhelming force. 3 worlds fell in a single day. The human defense fleets fought bravely, but were destroyed with ease. Thousands died in the first wave alone. The message was clear. Empress Vexathera had come to make humanity pay for their defiance, and she would not stop until every human was dead or enslaved.